Hey everybody, welcome to Rampage Reviews. I am Rampage, and it is 3 years later after episode 1, and now we get to see Anakin and Obi-Wan in some early adventures in their relationship, so let's dive in. So the book we're diving into today is Star Wars Rogue Planet. It's written by Greg Bear, and it takes place 29 years BBY. Really interesting story. It wasn't impactful to the overarching Skywalker saga in any way, but it was definitely a really interesting story to read. A lot of interesting concepts within the story. I just want to remind everybody early on, if you would like to follow along in this journey, there will be a link in the description for this book, as well as the next 3 books that I'm going to be reading, making the book available to purchase on Amazon. Be aware that I'm an Amazon affiliate, so if you do purchase through that link, it will benefit me or this channel in some way to keep this thing going. And also, if you like the content that you see today, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. There's a bit of a prologue where Anakin sneaks away from the Jedi Temple to participate in these garbage pit races on Coruscant, and I've never heard of these before. This story kind of introduces it. Anakin's basically kind of bored with his training and he needs a little excitement, so he goes to compete in these races, and Obi-Wan then has to find where he snuck off to. So he does find him eventually. Apparently these races, the biggest 2 risks are that you have these really dingy wings that are powered by fuel. You have to fly to race in this garbage pit race. Also, if you fall to the bottom, then you could be attacked by garbage pit worms, which are apparently really toxic and swim in this like toxic foam and stuff. So that sucks. But Obi-Wan does find him and forces Anakin to go back to the temple so that they can discuss more about their training. And then they are interrupted by Thracia Cho Leem, who is another Jedi Master in the temple. She had an apprentice named Vergere. I couldn't really know how to pronounce it. Vergere. And this apprentice, well, this Jedi, she was a Jedi, I believe, at the time. I don't think she was her apprentice when she went on this mission, but she traveled to a planet called Zonama Sekot. It was a kind of a mysterious planet. They make ships and they make other items there, but everything they make is living. They're living beings, and there's a process to it. So definitely an interesting concept that was brought up in this book. Obi-Wan and Anakin are tasked to go to this planet and not tip them off on why they're there, but to purchase a ship, go through the process, and then try to find out what could have happened to this Jedi. Now, on the flip side of the story, there is Commander Tarkin, not yet Grand Moff Tarkin, Lil Huff Tarkin. He's working with another person that he has apparently a lengthy relationship with and goes way back. His name is Wraith Senar. They have a long relationship, but Wraith is kind of weary that Tarkin is trying to send him on some sort of failed plan, like a plan that's going to blow up on him. And he knows that Tarkin is a very ambitious man, and he's willing to throw other people under the bus so that he can climb the ranks. Even though they have a working relationship that goes way back together, he's just wary of his tactics. So they have a plan to find the same planet that Obi-Wan and Anakin are going to, and to conquer the planet, because they're aware of the rumors of what that planet is capable of and what the people on the planet are capable of with the products that they make. So Anakin and Obi-Wan make it. They convince the locals that they're there to buy a ship. They don't mention Vergere at all, and they go through the whole process. It's a lengthy process. If I dove into it, then it would take me another 5-10 minutes to do so I won't. They eventually are able to make a ship, and Obi-Wan tells the locals that Anakin will be the pilot because he knows Anakin's a better pilot than he is. I think we went over it before. I don't think Obi-Wan likes to fly. Someone corrected me and said Obi-Wan doesn't like being flown, but he does like flying. So I guess there's a difference there. But they get their ship, and shortly after, there's a being that's called a blood carver, and I believe this book introduces that concept, but there is a bit of a history that's explained in Legends about the blood carvers, and they're kind of like Mandalorians in the sense that they are strong warriors, but that's about where it ends, I think, where the connection ends. Mandalorians, like, weapons are their religion. They're basically war machines, where blood carvers are more like assassins. It's basically all they're known for, I believe. This blood carver is enlisted by Senar, and he just so happens to also be someone that was competing with Anakin in the garbage pit races earlier in the book. Anakin almost kills him because the blood carver knows who he is. Apparently, I think he was sent to kill Anakin, or he was sent to find him. I believe he was sent to kill him. I don't know who would have sent him, but he knows who he is, and Anakin almost kills him in that race. So now he's enlisted by Senar. He's on Zonama Sekot to purchase a ship as well, that Tarkin tells Senar that he needs to try and do that. By the way, the blood carver's name is K-Dave. It's K-E-D-A-I-V. So K actually is unsuccessful in convincing the people to purchase a ship, because the process involves you having to have this relationship with these seedlings. If the seedlings don't like you, then you won't be able to take any to make a ship. So that's involved in that process. So the seedlings did not take to him. He begins to attack everybody on the planet. And he eventually finds Anakin. Anakin's got his ship. They're trying to find out what happened to Vergere at this point because they're talking to the locals about her. Then the blood carver finds Anakin, kind of takes him hostage and wants to take him and the ship back to Tarkin and Senar, so that way they can learn more about the ship and then also continue trying to conquer the planet. But Anakin says, I'm out of fuel. We need to find fuel. And there is a magister that rules over the whole planet, and Kay knows that there are fuel reserves in that that location, and he's familiar with it too. And Anakin is able to fly them there, but then they get there and the place is kind of destroyed. It's been attacked. They don't really explain who attacked it. It might have had to do with this previous conflict that happened not that long ago, and that was where Vigiri was involved. They found out that she tried to fend off this group called the Far Outsiders, and they don't know whether she joined them or whether she just fended them off. As she was gone, then this temple was left there like that. So now Kay is kind of antagonizing Anakin to find these fuel reserves because he believes they're still there. He is pushing him around with this lance, and then Anakin's getting upset. He's getting pissed off. The dark side's starting to roil within him, which is weird. He doesn't reach for it, but it's almost like he's this ticking time bomb that says, hey, stop it. I can't control it. Stop it. So finally, he is pushed so hard that he lashes out and he kills Kay. That's his first personal kill that he's ever had, and he didn't have a lightsaber. But yeah, the dark side came out and he couldn't control it, and that's the first time that we see that. They are able to get off world since Kay is killed. He was the one that was antagonizing the planet. I believe Tarkin and Cinar still are able to conquer the planet, but the twist is that the locals and all of their processes died off with them, and they were never able to make the ships the same way. And probably because of the way that the process was, it was a very organic, like all of the organic things around you had to take to you in order to make these items. So if they didn't, then you weren't going to be able to make the items. So you attack the planet, yeah, they're not going to work for you. What's wrong with you? But Anakin also gets to meet, I believe it takes the shape of a human named Sekot, who is basically, it's the planet in human form. And she talks to him and says, hey, I found out that I'm able to cause destruction because I had to fight these Far Outsiders. And Anakin's like, well, now you're going to want to fight against the Republic because they're trying to attack you. Anyway, story ends pretty quickly after that. Anakin talks to Tarkin. Tarkin interrogates him on what happened down on the planet and his ship. And Anakin's kind of defiant towards him, doesn't really want to say much to him. And the story ends pretty shortly after that. It's basically Obi-Wan reflecting on, this is what it's like to be a master. And I'm going to really have to find a way to rein in Anakin's shortcomings with his anger and his coping. Hopefully that wasn't too lengthy of an explanation. Like I said before, I do like the book. The story got a really slow start. After that slow start, once they landed on the planet, it actually got really interesting. And I really enjoyed it after that, because all that's included in creating these products, you have to find these partner seedlings that then have to attach themselves to you. They don't embed like any kind of stingers on you or anything like that, but they just have to like take to you and be with you. You form a little relationship with them. They kind of speak to you telepathically. Obi-Wan starts to feel like maybe they're connected to the Force in some way. And there's different things that are mentioned in this book that just some really interesting concepts. If this was brought into the canon storyline, it would bring a lot of other facets to how other people in the galaxy view the Force. Because a lot of times when you see people within the galaxy, it's everybody understands the Force as one thing, with the exception of when we read the High Republic. I know there was some differences in how people viewed it there. This would kind of add to that. It's not just the Force. These people call it the potentium or something like that. Just some really interesting concepts in this book. I enjoyed it. So now we'll get into some of the more interesting things that I found in the book. Anakin might have had some dangerous behaviors starting out as a Jedi. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon wouldn't have noticed it right away, but Obi-Wan seems to think that maybe Qui-Gon built up an attitude within Anakin that was not the best behavior to kind of build on when becoming a Jedi. He did that by encouraging Anakin to race for his freedom in the Boonta Eve Classic. Obviously, that was one of the only ways that they could think of to free him. Qui-Gon knew, or at least strongly felt, that he was the chosen one and had to get him off world. By doing this, I guess he created this need for risky behavior to fulfill some wants and needs. That's a risky behavior that I don't think Obi-Wan wanted to be encouraged. And we kind of see it later on in his career and relationship with Obi-Wan as well. The Trade Federation occupied Naboo in episode 1, and the book talks about the fact that the Trade Federation is still on Naboo and still trying to be disbanded from Naboo. And it goes like this. Tarkin smiled at this answer. Then I may have useful news for you, he said. I've just come from a secret meeting. Chancellor Palpatine is finally forced to stand down over the Naboo incident. The Trade Federation security forces will soon be disbanded. In the next few months, they are to be assimilated into Republic forces and placed at the disposal of the Senate. So they're basically saying that the military force belonging to the Trade Federation is going to be absorbed by the Republic. This book takes place 3 years after episode 1. It took 3 years to disband the Trade Federation, force this assimilation into the Republic. Well, I know the Senate moves slowly, but that's like the speed of a glacier. I mean, come on, man. The Jedi in this book are suggested to not be interested in contracting any sort of ship creation from the Republic or anybody else. And we know that not to be true because Canon tells in the High Republic that the Jedi used Jedi vectors 100 years prior. They obviously had those contracted and they believed it was necessary. They even built mechanisms within the ships that interacted with their lightsabers. I mean, we know the Jedi are interested in contracting ships. Cinar listened with growing interest, but also growing puzzlement. The Jedi had not once in his lifetime of designing and constructing fine ships and machines ever shown an interest in contracting for spacecraft. They had always seemed content to hitch rides. So that really disqualifies this book from canon, or at least that part of it. And there are other things that also disqualify it from canon, but that's just a pretty big one. And only because of the fact that very recently they released the notion that Jedi needed and wanted to design spacecraft, especially for Jedi. Order 66 takes roughly 12 to 13 more years to come to pass, but in this book we see that, if you wanted to include this in the storyline, that Tarkin was tasked with early to keep an eye on the Jedi on Coruscant and try to limit the power and influence that they have in the planet. So we see right away that Palpatine wasted no time in trying to undermine the influence of the Jedi before Order 66 happened. You don't necessarily see any undermining of the Jedi, obviously, in episode 2 or 3 as far as their power and influence, but it's in character for Palpatine to stay behind the scenes and just constantly break down the things that he needs to break down to gain and remain in power. The Death Star has a really interesting early concept in this book, and it's very different to what we know as the Death Star right now, and there's a small description of it in this book. It goes like this. Absently, and to create a distraction from his reaction to Tarkin's story, he switched on the hologram display, and millions of tiny curves and lines assembled in the air over the dark gray table. They formed a slowly rotating sphere with a wide slice removed from the side. Two smaller spheres appeared above and below the poles, linked by thick necks bristling with spiky details. They then go on to say after that, a small crew could police an entire system with one vessel, Tarkin mused. Well, not so small a crew, but one vessel certainly. Sinar walked around the display and made large, vaguely designing sweeps of his hands. I'm considering removing the extraneous spheres, sticking with one large ball, 90 or 100 kilometers in diameter. A more wieldy design for transport. So that ending description definitely describes what we know as the Death Star right now, but having like a sphere with a sliced off edge and two spheres above and below it, that'd be a really interesting concept for the Death Star, and I don't know that it would be as imposing. Maybe, I mean, if it's big, I guess it doesn't matter what it looks like, it's still going to be imposing. Really interesting concept to see going early on. I mean, given Rogue One and what we know about what happens, I mean, none of the people involved in the canon storyline are in this book, so that disqualifies it pretty quickly anyway. The Jedi that tasked Obi-Wan and Anakin with the mission to go find her former apprentice, Thracia Cho Leem, was described as having many children on many worlds, and this is way against what the Jedi stand for, because they don't believe in attachments, and they definitely wouldn't approve of people taking wives and having children. Now, I know that's weird to think and say, because we know that Ki-Adi-Mundi did this very thing, and that's just a part of his culture and his species, but how widespread is this allowance for people to take on attachments to where they have children and have partners? Where do they draw the line with that? And is this some kind of like a religious exemption? Because, I mean, as far as I knew, the Jedi was supposed to be their only religion, so I don't know. What's really interestingly brought up is that the Jedi take donations to help fund their missions and to help fund their calls for help to other planets when people need them to show up. What they say about the temple is true then, Anakin mused. That it holds secret treasure? Hardly, Obi-Wan said. These are drawn from a joint account in the Galactic Capital Bank. Many in the galaxy lend their resources to support the Jedi. Now, whether they mean many influential and wealthy people do this, or just many people anonymously donate to the Jedi, I don't know. But that is an interesting and believable concept that many people would donate to their cause. It's kind of like people throwing money in the donation plate to help support their religion and to help them appear when needed. I don't know if blue milk was a mystery to you, but it was to me, and I didn't know where would it come from, because what animal in the Star Wars galaxy produced blue milk? We see an animal in The Last Jedi produce green milk for Luke, because we know he likes all colors of milk besides white. We find out that banthas produce blue milk. Blue milk is called bantha milk, or it's called Tatooine milk. So banthas are obviously native to Tatooine. So if you didn't know that before, you now know, and you can finish the rest of your day unencumbered by this thought. The Patentium is a counter to the Jedi teachings about the Force that is introduced in this book. I didn't really know what it was, and it wasn't really explained what it was and what people who believe in the Patentium believe. What I was able to read or find from Wikipedia was, counter to millennia of Jedi teachings, the followers of Patentium claim that there was no inherent evil in viewing the Force. Actually, this is in the book, I just forgot about it. They heretically claim that what others called the light side of the Force was actually just the Force itself, which was inherently good. What others therefore called the dark side was a perversion of the Force, twisted by those who used it. This belief system was originally known as relativism. I really like seeing Star Wars stories that have other beings and other people, other cultures, other planets, call the Force other things and view the Force in a different manifestation than what the generic way to view it is. Another example of this would be the magic that is used by the Dathomirian witches. You have to believe that the energy that they draw from is the same energy that the Jedi draw from in the Force, that they just call it something different. They just call it magic. So I always like seeing different representations of that. It's really interesting. I mentioned earlier that when you go to the planet Zonama Sekot, there is a process that involves these seedling partners that have to attach to you and take a liking to you to where they can be brought into this process. You spend time together, you can hear things that they say. Obi-Wan thinks maybe it's through the Force that they're talking to you. They grow. Eventually they have to be put into this fire. They burn, but they grow when they burn, and then they become the material that you need them to be to make the product that you want to make. This was such an abstract idea for this book. I don't know if I've ever read something like this before, but they did liken it to how the Gungans make things in Oda Gunga, because they use materials that have life to them. So that comparison was interesting, but just the whole concept of this was just crazy to me. Several times Obi-Wan Obi-Wan can hear Qui-Gon talking to him in his head, and Obi-Wan isn't really sure if it's Qui-Gon or not. He thinks maybe it's just his inner voice, or maybe it's a lingering of Qui-Gon's teachings that just won't leave him alone. But there was a point in the book where he almost thought it was Qui-Gon talking to him, and Anakin swore that, well, maybe he's not dead. Maybe he's one with the Force and he's talking to you, which we know happens later. Eventually, you find out that concept is kind of squashed in the book anyway, and Obi-Wan believes it's just his own psyche talking to him about Qui-Gon's teachings. But we later know that Qui-Gon becomes one with the Force and talks to Obi-Wan. So Obi-Wan, after fighting Darth Maul and losing his lightsaber and gaining Qui-Gon's lightsaber, had not rebuilt his lightsaber yet, and I didn't realize it until page 241 in the book, which is funny because if you look at the cover, he has a green lightsaber. So I didn't really pay much attention to that part, but it's still 3 years later and he has not rebuilt a lightsaber. So I don't know if he's just having that hard of a time letting go of Qui-Gon's memory. But yeah, still has his lightsaber. Eventually, I think it's handed over to the Jedi Temple. So I don't know when he builds his new lightsaber. Anakin had gotten his first personal kill in this book, and it's to the Blood Carver, K-Dive. I believe that's how you pronounce it. The way they describe it is that Anakin was being prodded and prodded by this guy, and he felt himself getting angry, frustrated, and eventually, rather than reaching out to the Force, to the dark side of the Force, he was unable to contain it, and then it just lashed out as if it was this ticking time bomb that just exploded, and then he killed the Blood Carver, seemingly in cold blood, but also because he just couldn't contain himself. If you've heard of other instances where people have the dark side of the Force swelling within them that they can't contain it, tell me in the comments, but I just felt like that wasn't the way that worked. It's more seductive. You reach for it because you feel it's the easy way to gain more power, and I just wasn't really prepared to view it in that way. Obi-Wan and Anakin are on the planet Zonama Sekot, and it turns out that there is a being that takes the form of a human, as I said earlier, named Sekot, that is basically the planet, the human manifestation of the planet, like Ego in Guardians of the Galaxy. She talks about being trained by their magister of the planet on how to use her powers, and she didn't know there was any evil in the world, that she could cause any destruction, and I believe that this fuels their view of the Potentium, that the Potentium is inherently good and there's no evil within it. Well, it seems like it comes from this person, Sekot, or the planet, almost reminiscent of the father, the son, and the daughter, because they're supposed to represent the Force in some way, and this is a human manifestation, so you might see something like that going forward. Although Anakin was defiant with Tarkin when he was being interrogated, you could tell that Tarkin did not put up with Anakin's defiance. He was very persistent in finding out what Anakin knew about what was on the planet and about the way that he made his ship, and was not willing to get placated. It's a very early viewing of Anakin's relationship with Tarkin, because we know that Darth Vader and Grand Moff Tarkin in episode 4 have a close relationship, since Tarkin seems to be the second in command and seems to be above Darth Vader in some way in rank. So the fact that Tarkin got to him early to present this side of him gave Anakin a first impression that he could then draw upon when he later worked with Tarkin. So that's the end of the interesting things I found in the book. When I have these thoughts, I don't try to force it. These are things that I'm actively thinking when I read the book. These are really interesting concepts in this book. I think some of the concepts could be brought into canon. There's obviously others that really can't be brought into canon, like how the Death Star was discussed and created, or the idea of the Death Star. And I don't know that Jedi Cho Leem, the fact that she could have many partners and many kids around the galaxy, if that's something that the Jedi would have tolerated. Although, like I said, they tolerated it with Ki-Adi-Mundi, so I don't know where they draw the line there. But the idea of the Potentium, what they do on the planet, story and the adventure is kind of insignificant to the overarching story, but I'd like to see it in live action. It was definitely an interesting story. I liked it, and I was drawn into it after they landed on the planet. So I did give the book a 7.9, and not quite in the 8s because of its insignificance to the overarching story. It was a great singular story between Anakin and Obi-Wan, and it revealed a lot of things about Anakin's early struggle with the dark side and how their relationship was early on, because I think Anakin really wanted Qui-Gon as a master, but he didn't really get that chance, so Obi-Wan really had to force himself into that role. And that's it. That's a review, and I appreciate everybody that stopped by today. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel if you appreciated what you saw today. May the Force be with you. Everybody have a great rest of your day. Thank you.